We all know that we've made huge positive advances over the last decade or so. Progressively, all the different anti-gay laws have been repealed. So that's a huge, huge achievement. But there is still some unfinished business. Same-sex marriage, a great advance, but actually it's not full equality because LGBT people have been segregated into a special law about marriage which is separate from straight marriage. So we now have two marriage laws in this country. We've got the 1949 Marriage Act, which is for straight couples, and we've got the Marriage Same-Sex Couples Act 2013, which is for same-sex couples. And important and welcome though that advance is, to have separate laws is not equality. And so it's hugely disappointing that we aren't covered and included within the 1949 Marriage Act, which would have been true equality. The other big injustice is, of course, that pension inheritance is differential for same-sex married partners. If you're in a straight marriage and one partner dies, the surviving partner will have the legal right to inherit their deceased partner's pension, going way, way back, even like to the 1980s. But in a same-sex marriage, if one partner dies, the surviving partner will only be able to lawfully claim pension contributions from 2005, even though the deceased person may have been paying into their pension since 1980. That's very, very, very unfair. So that's one bit of unfinished business. The second one is, of course, the ongoing problem with homophobic hate crime. Recent surveys show that one third of all LGBT people in Britain have been victims of homophobic hate crimes, ranging from threats and abuse and insults to actual physical violence. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of LGBT people in this country who've been victims of hate crimes. And you may have heard about the horrific attack in London just in the last week, where ammonia was squirted into a guy's eyes by a homophobic gang, and he may lose the sight of one eye. You know, that shows that even in London, a supposedly liberal, tolerant city, it still isn't entirely safe, and there still are homophobic hate crimes. In our schools, more than half of all young people have been victims of homophobic or transphobic bullying. More than half. And yet only half of all schools have an anti-bullying program that specifically addresses the bullying of LGBT people. So again, that's a really big, big failure. We also, of course, have a raft of fantastic equality laws now. Most notably the Equality Act of 2010. But all those equality laws have limited qualified exemptions for religious organizations. So, not just places of worship, but faith-run schools, hospitals, nursing homes, homeless shelters, they are all under the law entitled to discriminate against LGBT people in employment and the provision of services if they can demonstrate that it's against their religious ethos. Now, I'll defend people of faith against discrimination, but I don't think they should have the right to discriminate against us. In a democratic society, everyone should be equal before the law, and no form of discrimination should be tolerated or exempt. So just as I would never, ever countenance discrimination against a person of faith, they should not be allowed to discriminate against us. The final issue I want to flag up is, of course, the appalling mistreatment of LGBT refugees who come to Britain to seek a safe haven, and in nearly all cases, on their first application, they are refused. The refusal rate is much, much higher for LGBT refugees than for political, religious, or ethnic refugees. And that means that people fleeing persecution in horrendous countries like Uganda, Nigeria, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Jamaica, and so on, they have a really, really big, tough battle to win asylum. Increasingly, the Home Office is pursuing an agenda of cutting numbers. Driven by the Daily Mail, the Home Office wants to cut the number of people granting refugee status. So sadly, individual cases are often not assessed upon merit. The instruction from the Home Office is to fail as many people as possible. So for example, the legal aid money for asylum cases has been cut. And on the money that's now available, no refugee can possibly complete an adequate asylum application because the money simply isn't there to enable them to collect the evidence to prove their case. Likewise, many refugees are put in asylum detention centres, which are in effect prisons, which is truly, truly shocking, since many of these people have fled persecution, in some cases themselves been imprisoned. They come to this country to seek refuge, and they're put in what is in effect a prison, and they're put under fast track, which is a speeded up asylum process where they have only 2 weeks to make their application and to fight an appeal against any decision to deny them asylum. Nobody can complete an application, let alone an appeal against refusal, in 2 weeks. It's just impossible. And that shows the way in which the system is rigged to fail as many asylum seekers as possible. And LGBT people have the toughest time of all. Increasingly, the Home Office is saying to individuals, we don't believe you're gay. Even when they have statements from their partners, from friends, sometimes from family members, who will attest to the fact that they're gay, lesbian, bisexual or transgender, still the Home Office will dispute this. So what is happening increasingly is some refugees in desperation are being forced to film or photograph themselves having sex in order to prove that they're LGBT. And for many of these refugees who come from deeply religious and conservative societies, to show any kind of nakedness, let alone sexual act, is deeply, deeply offensive and humiliating. But they're forced to do that because otherwise they will not be believed. So we really do have to improve the asylum system to make it fairer, because I've dealt with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of LGBT refugees, supported them over the last 20 years, and I can tell you that every single one that I've dealt with, I believe was genuine. Contrary to what the Daily Mail says, 90% or more of all refugees are genuine. And they are often being refused despite the genuineness and sincerity of the application. So really we need to get the asylum system right, so that those who've suffered great persecution, when they come here, they can find a place of refuge. That's our duty, but it's also our benefit, because most asylum seekers have skills and talents that we want and need. I'll give you one example. About 10 years ago, I helped get asylum for an Iraqi doctor. He was gay, he was hounded and threatened by Islamist militias in Iraq. They came to his house to kill him. Fortunately, he wasn't there. They went to his partner's house. Sadly, his partner was there, and he was shot dead on his doorstep. This guy managed to escape Iraq. He came to Britain. It was only thanks to the support of me and others that he won asylum, because the system is rigged. But he did win asylum, and he ended up going to work in a small hospital in northern Scotland, where they had no doctor with his specialist skills. So he brought to that community a much needed medical expertise, which is of value to the people in that community. So it's a good example of how so many LGBT refugees and other refugees are making a positive contribution to our society. So please don't believe the scare stories of the Daily Mail and UKIP. Asylum seekers who have suffered persecution deserve a place of refuge, and they can make a positive contribution to our society. The final point I'll make is, of course, the struggle for LGBT rights is a global one. And we must never forget the hundreds of millions of LGBT people living in countries around the world where they suffer criminalisation and persecution. Nearly 80 countries in the world still criminalise homosexuality, with penalties ranging from just a few years imprisonment right up to life imprisonment, and even execution in about 6 to 8 countries. More than half of those countries that criminalise homosexuality are members of the Commonwealth, which is an association of nations supposedly committed to equality and non-discrimination. The Commonwealth Charter says that all member states must honour equality and commitment to all its citizens, including LGBT ones. Yet the majority of Commonwealth countries, 42 out of 53, that's 80% of Commonwealth countries, continue to persecute LGBT people. And in northern Nigeria and parts of Pakistan, there is Sharia law, and LGBT people can face execution. As you know, Brunei has just announced the introduction of Sharia law, and in 2 years' time, they will also introduce Sharia law executions for LGBT people. So we really have a battle on to fight and win equality in the Commonwealth, let alone the rest of the world. So when you hear about the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow next month in July, please remember that most of the competing nations will be nations that persecute LGBT people. Jamaica, Uganda, Nigeria, Malaysia, Brunei, Cameroon, and many, many others. We need to stand in solidarity with all LGBT people worldwide to ensure freedom for all. My final thought, whatever the situation is today, however bad it is, we will win. Queer freedom is an unstoppable global trend. One day, someday, we all will be free. So hang on to that dream. Hang on to that dream of a world without homophobia, without transphobia, a world where every LGBT person lives in equality. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, absolutely fabulous. That is Peter Tatchell. Thank you very much.